believe it to be so. It is going to be somewhat difficult, if I be honest. Um, all right, thank you very much, Don. I appreciate that. Yep. All right, more logic. Thank you for being on. I guess that's your way of saying hello. Bob Marley didn't quite look like me at all, but I guess besides the fact that we're black and we have a lot of hair. But hey, man, compare me to Marley all day. Compare me to Marley all day. I'm with it. So, but yeah, so this is something that means a lot today, to be able to have the opportunity to be in front of you all. All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Elohim. All praises to him for my wife, the Honorable Maya, who lives a life that's able to be honored. You can follow her and find out more information about what she does at Bloom and Flourish. That's the letter N, not A-N-D, Bloom and Flourish. You can find her on TikTok, YouTube, and her website. And today I want to talk about something specific. I want to talk about you and your enemy, or well, we'll say you and your enemy were taught the same, right? You and your enemy were taught the same. And that might be something where some people go, well, what does that really mean? Does that really solve anything? What does that help? Well, it's going to mean a lot, as we're going to find out. Because if you comprehend that you and your enemy were taught the same thing, you'll even discover that you and your enemy were taught to think the same way. Which means, right, in this system we're in, you and your enemy were even taught to think the same way. If you were taught to think the same way and were taught the same thing, and somehow, some way you ended up in different places, we have to start evaluating some things that were taught, some ways that we were taught, and some things that we need to comprehend. Because if you can get that, it's going to help you with empathy, it's going to help you with sympathy, it's going to help you with a lot of different things that you might not think, right now that you need to put as much time into. But when you realize that you and your enemy were taught the same thing, we're taught the same way, we're taught the same value system, and we're taught the same belief system, you start to realize, maybe we should get to some of the issues. If we were taught the same thing, maybe we need to figure this out. Because if we were taught the exact same thing, then we need to make sure that we begin to live the same thing or begin to have the same truths. It only would make sense. How is it that we're taught the same thing, we know the same things, we think the same way, until we get broken of some things. Sometimes we go into kingdom thinking and other things, but for the most part, we even taught to think the same way. You went to the same schools, you went to the same type of colleges, you have the same type of debt, you're in the same type of being a United States citizen, instead of being a citizen of the United States of America and all that stuff. And yet somehow, some way, you're having arguments with people about the smallest of differences, and we're trying to figure out why we can't come together due to the smallest of differences. Revelation 12:9. We can go to and look for that. Hold on one second. Uh-oh. Interesting. Hold on one second. Let's look at this real quick. Trying to get Wi-Fi on here. All right. Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. Let's see. It is bad that I hate Satan more than I love Elohim. I need to channel more positive energy. Yeah, I can see that. That's actually, I see what you're saying. I'm praying that you're able to do that. Revelation. Why can't I get to Revelation? There we go. 12. In verse 9, it says, and the great dragon was cast out, the serpent called the devil, Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, or the whole system of things. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Amen. And so you've been trained to hate your brother, or to go against your brother, or say your brother's too right-leaning, your brother's too left-leaning, your sister's too right-leaning, your sister's too left-leaning. And the reality is you believe the same thing, you were taught the same thing. You were taught to be dismissive of one another, believe it or not, right? So if that's what's going on, we've got to reverse that, right? We got to figure out, how to get things back on track, because you and your enemy, right, were taught the same thing. And we're going to make sure that you get that. You and your enemy were taught the same thing. Amen. And we want you to walk away with that. And I'm going to show you, we're going to use something like the Civil War, which we've talked about before, but I want to show you just in something as simple as the Civil War, how easy it is for the enemy to take something that you have used and known and grown in, misuse it, mischaracterize it on both sides, and have both sides think about something outside of what it originally was, right? Outside of something that originally was meant to be, outside of something that it originally was doing to help and bless the community. I want to show you how something that you swear you know everything about, the Civil War, could be something that could be miscategorized to have Republican versus Democrat be something that's stronger than the Union. Like, think about that. Republican versus Democrat is stronger than the Union. The Union's supposed to be what was fought for the Civil War, and yet Republican versus Democrat is more important than the union of brothers and sisters. Thank you very much, Rocky, right? So, yeah, it's pretty cool teaching space. So you said, are we supposed to love Satan as well? Isn't that agape love? I mean, you're supposed to, sure, if you love your enemy, that doesn't mean that you hang out with them. If you want to say that you love the sinner, okay, what are the actions that you're giving them? Are you worshiping Satan? Or are you praying for Satan? Maybe you should pray for Satan. I believe that it's all right to pray for Satan. But if Satan's made a decision that he's made, and so be it. If Satan's trying to ruin your life, I wouldn't sit there and try to follow him or try to lift that up or try to be like, hey, let's be about maintaining somebody that's trying to tear us down. So, here we are. Well, I'm not going to go into Revelation that deep into today. That's not the focus. I apologize. We went into Revelation somewhat. If you're talking about the mark, really the mark comes from cultural stuff where you're talking about 666 being an actual number of a name. If you know how to write out the name in Hebrew, you know how to get that. That's more so what the mark is. And you're talking about a spirit that goes all the way back to something that supersedes Justinian and goes all the way back to your 4th or 5th emperor of Rome. Look at that spirit that continues to go on. But that's not what my focus is today. We actually have classes and stuff, and we're actually going to start going into Bible study on a Zoom lesson starting every Monday on October 18th. So if you want to join us for that, we'll do that. But once again, we're trying to get everybody under the comprehension that you and your enemy were both taught the same thing, right? And I want to show you how you were taught the same thing, and yet you have this enemy that you guys believe the same thing. So we got to get to why is that? Why is it you're taught the same thing? Why is it you're taught the same way? And yet you guys are so opposed to one another that you're ready to fight, that you're ready to tell the other person that they're terrible because they believe in this type of right or that type of right, or they believe in voting for this person or that person, or they believe in this type of sexuality or that sexuality. What is it that has caused you to hate your neighbor who has been taught the same thing and the same values that you have, yet they have twisted it to where the smallest of differences can be there? I want to show you, once again, going to history, right? Or his story. Really, it should be our story or the story, but we call it his story, so I'll call it that for today. I want to go back to what people would call his story, okay? What does his story say about this? What is this stuff about the Civil War tell us about things? Why was the Civil War, first of all, why was the Civil War started? And when did the Civil War start? Because a lot of people will tell you that the Civil War started in 1861. Let's just go to something that's simple. Supreme Rising Nerdon. A lot of people will tell us something as simple as the Civil War started in 1861. We got a problem there, though, because if the Civil War started in 1861, we have a problem with that. You know why? Because people started leaving the Union in 1860, so we're already messed up. Right? And people will say 1861. See, something small begins to dilute what it is. You've been taught the same thing, but you've all been taught the same group of lies. So now we got to figure out these lies, right? If the Civil War started in 1861, but people started leaving the Union in 1860, did the Civil War start in 1861 or in 1860? Right? Number one. Number two, were people already fighting before 1860? Right? Were people already fighting? And forgive me, I just realized I still got stuff on the side of my face. Did people start fighting in 1860 or before then? Concerning what you've been taught, a lot of us have been taught the Civil War was about slavery, and that's all it was. It was about slavery, and that's it. That's not the reality at all. That's not the reality at all, right? that it was being fought about slavery somewhat, but really follow the money, you'll be able to find out why wars are fought, right? Including in the Republic of the United States of America. And slavery is something that's been an issue since before the Civil War. The North versus the South is something that's been an issue since before the Civil War, right? Well, even if you talk about the Vatican supporting it, right? That's actually something that's not quite factual. The Vatican was visited by the Confederacy. The Confederacy, I forget the name of the person that was sent, but basically Jefferson Davis sent somebody as a representative to see if they would support the war and support the South. The Vatican basically said, and they told the Vatican, though, they're not going to become Catholic. They told them we're straight up not going to, we're not going to get rid of slavery, which the Vatican, even though he had slaves, was, publicly supporting that they were anti-slavery, because that was a big deal, because people were getting into, excuse me, I told you, I'm not out the woods yet. So people were getting into capitalism, and capitalism said, hey, slavery is anti what we want, even though capitalism allows for slavery, it just allows for it in a different way. They didn't want chattel slavery. So the Pope was like, hey, we can't support slavery publicly. We can't support you as far as if you're not even going to be underneath, the Roman Catholic Church, and you're going to obey the Pope. But he wrote a letter saying, well, we still think that the Confederacy is a better alternative than the Union. The Confederacy took this and said this is an outright thing, saying that the Pope completely supports what we're doing, and they ran with it, and they used it as propaganda to be able to get people to fight, since there were some people who were still using Roman Catholic roots. Remember, places like Maryland, are named after Queen Mary. Who's Queen Mary? Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary, the one who tried to bring Roman Catholicism and reestablish it after her father, Henry VIII, and her little brother, I forget his name, the prince that ruled right after Henry VIII and died in his teenage years. Right after both of them had tried to establish Protestantism and break away, she tried to bring Roman Catholicism right back, right? So you got to recognize, I am not a Rastafari, even though I have a Rastafari in my family. So you got to understand, even that is something that was misrepresented, right? So, and you got to understand, even with all this stuff, don't just look at that. Look at what happened with, Spain. In Spain, who tried to come over, and they took back over, the Dominican Republic. They had lost all that during, they had lost that ability to have the money and the sugar cane and all that stuff, Haitian Revolution, all those things. They used the Civil War to come back during that. Europe was paying attention, but Europe never fully got into it. Russia said that they supported the supported the Confederacy. So did England, by the way, because England and Russia were getting a lot of money, and France, by the way, were getting a lot of money a lot of things due to the cotton that they were getting. And what Jefferson Davis thought, the president of the Confederacy, and a lot of Confederates thought, they used this term called King Cotton, which, by the way, is still on a lot of your products if you live in certain southern places, or even certain places in the Republic of the United States of America, excuse me, where they're selling cotton, right? And they sell they sell different products. So there's King Cotton bacon, there's King Cotton this, that, whatever. And they used to sell King Cotton products, a lot of different products. And it was because there was this idea that cotton is king. Nobody's going to mess with us, because anybody who wants cotton around the world, they got to get it from us. That was until these places started stockpiling cotton, and they started making cotton in places like India. And I forget, there was one other country that was really well known for them making cotton. Since they had cotton in those places and they had ownership over those places, right, they had colonies there, they weren't worried about the South as much, even though they still wanted to be friends. So they were okay to not support them as far as go to war with them. Look at places like Prussia. People always forget about Prussia. The Prussians, who were a big deal for a long time in European history, the Prussians came over and actually had people fight on both sides. Think about what I'm telling you. The Prussians had sent people to fight on both sides. Thank you very much, Mary. Right, so Prussians sent people over to study what was going on and to see if they could help them to fight on what? On both sides. And the Prussians actually wrote back. We can read what they wrote, right? And the Prussians actually wrote back, and they said, you know what? We can see that you guys, that these fighters in the American North and the South, they're not even that great. They're not well trained. They're not well organized. They don't really have the stomach for this. They don't have the money that's necessary. Like they dogged them. And the Prussians actually were, if they didn't outright just observe, sometimes they were even leaders over the armies. So the Prussians were busy fighting and using other people to experiment on, to see how that how they would do, right? So you've been taught, once again, you have been taught something about a part of the story, but once again, there's little pieces missing to show you that this was a lot more, there was a lot more to this than what a lot of us may think, right? There was a lot more to this than what a lot of us may think. Once again, there was a lot more to this than a lot of us may think. It's the context and the facts coming together. Some facts that are missing, some context that's missing. Going back though, so if we establish that the Civil War was not started in 1861, but people started leaving in 1860, it's by December 1860, you already have 7 states that have seceded and began to have a confederacy. Jefferson Davis was talking trash about leaving the Union way before those states had seceded, and others had as well, right? And then you have other states afterwards, right? And they said that they were leaving specifically. They have it written down, telling you that they were leaving specifically because it looked like Lincoln was going to win. And they believed that if Lincoln won, he was going to put capitalism first. And if capitalism went first, they wrote out. Don't listen to what people are going to tell you with the lost cause rhetoric. You can read what they wrote. The southern states that seceded wrote and said that we must secede because they're trying to get rid of slavery. They even wrote things out like slavery is beneficial to both the bond and the free, meaning that the white slave owner and the slave themselves both had a mutual benefit that came out of slavery. Sounds like what we're talking about with 14th Amendment citizenship and sovereignty, right? To where people who are not sovereign, people who are United States citizens, they are taxed off of what? Off of privileges and benefits. Well, if you're taxed off of your benefits, and they call slavery a benefit, then you are messed up. That's why when you go to prison, 13th Amendment says that you can be enslaved if you are in prison, and they will call it a benefit, which is why if you try to get out of prison, right? If you try to get out of prison, if you try to get out of being locked down, even mentally, they try to punish you. Why? They'll tell you you still can't get certain benefits because you were in prison and you didn't pay enough taxes or you didn't pay enough this or that while you were in. Well, hey, you have me locked up. Well, it doesn't matter. It was a benefit to be in there because we gave you a place to stay. We gave you a job to toil in. We made sure that you had food. We made sure that you were you had enough time to deal with your health. Well, I had to stay inside of a cell, but an hour a day, if you guys would even allow me out that hour. It doesn't matter. That hour was suffice. Right? Sufficeth enough for you to be able to do what you want. Hey, we might have even allowed you to, if you could afford to, here's the thing people don't even realize, if you can afford to talk to your family, or if your family can afford to give you money that you can talk to them, we even let you talk to your family, right? These are all things that are there. If you wanted to go to a church service, once we said that you were okay enough to go to one, you could go to a church service or, whatever service that we allow you to do, right? If you didn't want to eat, if you wanted to eat healthy, I mean, we didn't give you much in that, but hey, you ate something, so they get to tax you, right? So here you are, they're telling you, and those who are slave owners, right now, both the North and the South were slave owners, right? So we can't get that twisted, but the ones who are trying to hold on to chattel slavery as the way of life in the South are saying, hey, this is a benefit. These people, or they're not even people, remember 3/5 compromise, they're not even people anymore, right? But these people are what? And hold on to that 3/5 compromise. We're going to make that work correctly, right? But they're saying these slaves, this property, they benefit. Now, how does property benefit? I don't know how property gets benefits, but right. So see how they keep having cognitive dissonance, because either I'm a person and I get benefits, or I'm property and I get benefits. But if I'm property, I get benefits. If I'm a person, then I get benefits, right? Even if the benefit is slavery. See what I'm saying? So they're twisting stuff already. You can catch it. This is how you get taught the same thing, and yet are arguing different things, right? But they're telling you, hey, these things that aren't quite people, but we're going to use them as people here. We're saying that slavery is beneficial for them and is beneficial for us, right? Now go back before 1860. How far can we go back? We can go back to 1856. 1856 is when you get something called, I'm sorry, you said my 8th grade teacher low-key taught CRM. She broke down the whole war for us, used coloring maps, okay. Right, so watch this. So let's go back to 1856. 1856, if you look, you will discover that 1856 is the beginning of something called the Kansas Wars. This is something that I'm about to say John Smith, but John Smith's not the right guy. Pastor John Brown. John Brown, who ends up dying for what happens at Harper's Ferry when he put his money where his mouth is. But a lot of people think John Brown, that was the first time he fought back. John Brown and his sons. John Brown, by the way, who was a pastor that got kicked out of his congregation or out of his religious group because he was teaching that slavery was wrong. He went around America, Canada, and the Caribbean, teaching people that slavery was bad and speaking out on behalf of it. John Brown, part of the Underground Railroad. John Brown, who was gave up property in one place to move somewhere else. Then John Brown, who he and his sons went and fought in the Kansas Wars. That we're talking about 1856, and these Kansas Wars were fought because you had a lot of new states that were coming into being, the new territories. Now, the territories would eventually turn into states. What happens when the state turns into a territory? What happens when a state turns into a territory? When a state turns into a territory, a state is basically, the state, it becomes a country. The United States of America are united countries of America. That's how that works, right? That's why a United States citizen is different than a citizen of the United States of America. A United States citizen is under the corporation of the federal government, right? 1866, 14th Amendment citizen. Those who are citizens of the United States of America, that Constitution says that all 50 states, thanks for the love, all 50 states are underneath one banner, right? And all these 50 states have to help everybody, which means that if I'm in California, if I'm in Maine, if I'm in Florida, if I'm in Washington, if I go all the way to Hawaii, if I go all the way up to Alaska, all of the states have to protect my rights as a sovereign citizen. No, excuse me, as a sovereign, not a citizen, sovereign citizen. Sovereign citizen doesn't exist. As a citizen of the United States of America and as a sovereign, right? So I want you to understand that they were understanding these countries would become countries, and these countries, though, were in disagreement, or these territories, just like the states or the countries, were in disagreement about slavery and if they wanted capitalism or chattel slavery to be their main source of goods and income, right? So what they would do, what the North would do, and what the South would do is they would send different people in the different territories, and they would fight each other. They would literally fight. They were at war with one another to try and make sure that enough people were there left by the time that they had a certain amount of people. Once you hit a certain number of people, you could go from a territory to a country or a territory to a state. And so they would send enough people there to make sure that once they had enough people to become certified as a country, as a state, that they would vote to be either a slave state or a free state, which really was just chattel slavery or slavery through capitalism, right? But that was the goal. That was the fight, so that the powers that be would have another country that was on their side. So they were already sending people to fight and die, which means that the Civil War obviously started before 1861, not just 1860, but all the way back to 1856. But we could continue back further than that, because if we go all the way back to 1789 is when you get many people call him your first president. He's more like your ninth president. But many people who are your first president actually will get to a place where if you'll recognize that you'll actually get to a place back in 1789 when George Washington is voted in as, quote unquote, the first president of the Republic of the United States of America. What we will discover and find out is that George Washington himself is a Virginia slave owner. Then and he builds a place called Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the District of Columbia. Columbia being the goddess, Washington being the father god, right? Washington, Columbia. Columbia is still on. If you go down, for those of you, I got somebody I think who's on from D.C. right now who just joined us on the Facebook page. We're appreciative. Thank you for being on. If you go down to the National Mall, look on top of the Congress building, you still see this goddess that's on top, and her name is Columbia. She is a goddess. Some people try to say she was named after Christopher Columbus, but if you check the record, the Greek goddess Columbia existed before Christopher Columbus. So when you look up to her and you look across at the obelisk, which represents a penis, and that is supposed to be George Washington's monument, the same George Washington whose penis ends up being messed up because of syphilis. He is supposed, but they have to reestablish his phallus, just like what happened with the Egyptian god Osiris, right? Where he lost his phallus when his body was ripped apart, and he had to have his wife, Isis, put his body back together, but she could never find his penis. Therefore, she makes this dildo type object that you call an obelisk. That's what an obelisk is. And so she uses that to be able to have seed come through this necrophiliac type act, right? This act of necrophilia that allows her to be able to give birth to her son. So George Washington thing is basically a necrophilia type act that allows this goddess Columbia to help give birth to what you guys call Americans. This stuff is right here, but you've never been taught this. Now go back to George Washington being his first president. He establishes Washington, D.C. What does he do? He is a Virginia slave owner. He is also the first president, right? He tells Virginia, as the owner of Virginia land and as a high-ranking person and as the president of all these countries, these states that are coming together, he tells them, he tells Virginia, you're going to give us a certain amount of land, right? And we're going to do what on this land? We're going to build, right? He puts out this contract, he puts out this contest where different people can get this contract together or win this contract, and they build a mansion in the middle of this land, right? Now, right now, in the middle of this land, then they start to build crops. And what do? They get slaves to attend to this crop, right? And then they get overseers to be over the slaves. Washington, D.C., therefore, is nothing more than a government-sanctioned and government-owned slave plantation that every president is the master over. This is what he sets up, right? Now, this same person, though, go back from 1789, though, just in 1776, when he was around 40 years old, this same person was busy telling people that, hey, we need to fight against King George, who was his boy, by the way. King George was his boy. That was his friend and remained his friend after the war, which means that all that stuff that he talks about him being a tyrant and stuff, that's nonsense. That's bull, right? This boy in him, he says, oh, my boy is a tyrant because King George was tired of Washington and others being disobedient to him, which was called treason. And so since they were treasonous, they were coming to kill them. George Washington says we need to get people on our side so that they won't kill us. We'll have freedom. But the reality was we don't want to die. King George coming to kill us. We could just let him kill us and then everybody be straight. But nope, we want to win freedom. It was not something that was done purposefully to gain anybody freedom. And George Washington was a slave owner. So how is it George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, these presidents that you have are all slave owners, and yet they're telling you about freedom? The reality is they didn't believe in it. Right now, why is it that England and them were having beef in the first place? Now, we keep talking about taxation without representation. Taxation without representation. That's something that they gave you guys later on down the road, and people like to run with that. That's not the reality, though. It wasn't taxation without representation, right? Because they had never been taxed. They had never been taxed ever. They were okay with not being taxed. They were okay without having representation. Now, all of a sudden, it's, oh, you're going to tax us. We're going to find a reason why you can't tax us, right? But that wasn't the issue. You've never been taxed. King George said, look, we're running out of money. We've been fighting everybody. If you want us to keep policing you, keeping you safe, doing all these things, then we might have to tax you. And finally they said, okay, when they realized that they didn't want to do something, what did they do? We talked about this before. They put on blackface. When did they even become Americans? The first original definition of an American, by definition of white man, the first definition of an American is what? Is that it is a black or copper-colored person who is an indigenous person to the Republic, or what you now call the Republic of the United States of America. That is the original definition of an American. Then comes the Boston Tea Party. In the Boston Tea Party, the people who killed off natives, pushed them off their land, scalped them, took their outfits. They put on those same outfits and took off the things that were attached to those scalps that they used and that they took. And they put on blackface. They put on makeup over it. And they hooped and hollered. And they said, now we're the Americans. This is our land. We're going to fight for it. Okay? See, something as simple as the Civil War, it's been going on since the beginning. And you know why they fought against them? Because the British were saying not only do we want tax, but hey, eventually we're going to kind of, especially because of what looks like is going on in places, you know, who are getting independence or fighting back, or slavery is not necessarily making the money we need to. And we need other people to be able to have a place, you know, not besides just rich white elite people, to make this society go. So we understand that if only a few people have all the money, it's not going to work correctly. They said, well, you know what, we need to make sure that there's competition. Now, even if there's only a few people that end up with the money, there has to be more competition where everybody will work as hard as they can so we can make as much money as we can off of other people. England said that's where we're headed. America said we're not cool with that because most of America's power was due to what? Rich white slave owners. These rich white slave owners then all of a sudden said we don't want to be taxed. on top of that, then all of a sudden, next thing you know, these people say, oh, we hate the tyrants who are trying to make slaves out of us. Meanwhile, we're slave owners in the first place. You've been fighting the war about slavery since before America even existed. Right? The first slaves are not even African slaves that people keep telling you about in the 1600s or even the 1500s. The first slaves, if we be honest, the first slaves were Native American slaves that were already being brought to Europe. Right? That's why you had when the who you now call the Pilgrims or you now call the Puritans and all these names that are nice and fancy that we like to use. When these people first came back or first came here or whatever, you know what? They ran into people that spoke English. They admit that to you, even in their Thanksgiving stories. Why did they speak English already? Not because the English had showed up, but because they had been taken as slaves. Squanto, whose name is Tisquantum, he was taken as a slave and he came back. He spoke Spanish, he spoke English, he came back on a ship. It wasn't a, they used to teach in school in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and the 2010s, and we're still teaching in 2020s, right? So this is modern messing up of teaching. You're being taught something on both sides that's wrong, that's messing up your thought process. They teach this wrong. Tisquantum family was killed, right, as he was taken to be a slave. He came back over, and the chief didn't even trust him because he said something's wrong with you because he had become a house Negro, so to speak, right? He was not acting like Uncle Tom. He was acting like a Squanto. He was acting like a Sambo, right? And so Squanto was not acting right, so they didn't even trust him when the Pilgrim showed up. And what did Squanto do? Tisquantum, he went over to the people who used to be his slave masters and said, hey, I'll help you to master these people and to be over them if you allow me to have something in return. Right? Free labor had no color? Well, I guess you could say that. Free labor had no color, sure. What was the percentage of black people? Or let's do it like this. Since you say free labor had no color, let's just go. Let's fast forward back some. So because we already went all the way back to the 1400s, pretty much. Let's come back to 1861, when the Civil War starts. Can you tell me the percentage of people in the South that were slaves, that were legal slaves, that were black slaves because of the color of their skin? What is the percentage of people in the South, even though they weren't considered to be people, but if we were to act like they're human beings, because, some people don't like to do that still to this day. Let's pretend that these were human beings, even though by law they weren't. Three-Fifths Amendment, or the Three-Fifths Compromise, by the way, didn't say that they were three-fifths of a human being. The Three-Fifths Compromise existed before they did that. Three-fifths of the compromise was basically Southerners didn't want to pay taxes, even though they had more land and more property than white people did. The white people in the North did, and they were starting to take over land all the way through to California, right? So people said, you know what? Since you guys have more land, you should pay more taxes. They eventually compromised, said, okay, we'll pay 3/5 taxes. People saw them with slaves and said, well, those slaves down there, they're people, right? Since they're people, shouldn't you pay taxes for them too? And they said, no, we don't pay taxes for them like people. We'll just go ahead and do the Three-Fifths Compromise. These aren't people, these are our property. We don't consider them to be human beings, right? So from that Three-Fifths Compromise, after that, then they said, okay, slaves are not people. So slaves were considered to be 0% human beings, not 3/5% of a human being. You weren't even considered to be a human being. Now that we got that straight though, now let's fast forward. Can you tell me, right? And who was that? And I'm not coming at you, Jason. I just want to ask a question, because a lot of people don't comprehend what we're talking about here correctly. We're talking about context, contextual facts, right? So how many people in 1861 who lived in what would become the Confederacy, how many people there made percentage-wise were black slaves? Can you tell me that? And then I'm going to ask you another question if you can tell me that. And we'll see if this is not me coming against it. This is not me being a Republican or Democrat. This is not me being an American. This is not me making sure that I have to obey the laws of the land or say this. This is not me saying that. This is just me being a completely objective. Let's go from a thought process of we're not connected. What is the percentage? Even if you need to look it up on Google, right? What is the percentage of people who lived in the Republic of the United States of America? Actually, it wasn't even Republican, right? It was a fight. So it lived in the Confederacy, 1861, right? What is the percentage of people who were black slaves that lived down there? Can you tell me that? You said now you're into 1800. You started at 1600 before. Nope, if you were with us, I don't know if you were with us the whole time. We actually started in 1860, worked our way back. And actually, I went to the 1400s, if you were paying attention. And then I said, let's fast forward back now to the 1800s. But I'm on it. Once again, though, can you tell me what is the percentage? I don't see you answering that, so I'll answer it for you. All right? Not 5%. 5% way too low. 70%, that's actually way too high. I'm not going to just use it to make my point. I'm going to give you an exact number. And then I'm going to give you something else that's going to mess with you even more. Right? All right? So I'm going to give you the number. You ready? And thank you for that, Dennis. I appreciate the happy born day wish. Thank you very much. So if Jason is still on, don't know if you're there or not. Somebody said 55, somebody said 35. The answer is 40, it was at 49%, I believe. Uh-oh, I feel like it's 48 or 49. Maybe it's 48 point something. You know what, let's even lessen it, just to make sure that I'm correct. Let's say it's 45%. Can we do that? 45%, I'm actually working with you. All right, so that means that if you went down south, you would have seen, for every 100 people that would have been down there, let's say you had a room of 100 people. If I were to say to 100 people in the South, raise your hands if you were a slave, 45 people would have, or if I were to say stand up if you were a slave, 45 people would have stood up. I'm saying right at 1861. Right when people say the start of the Civil War is, even though you had 1860, the succeeding states, and you had 1856, the Kansas Wars, and we can keep going back to give more and more examples. But when people say 1861, at that point, which is the highest, because a lot of people will also try to lie with lost cause rhetoric, and they'll try to say, well, you know, the statistics actually were coming down. You know, there were less people, there were less slaves, and had people just left it alone. That's what the South says. The South says if people had just left it alone, slavery probably would have disappeared. That's what they tried to say, people like General Lee believed and stuff like that. The reality is that slavery was at its highest peak in 1860 and 1861, meaning that it kept going higher and higher and higher, right? And had there been no war, who knows if it continues to go higher, maybe it would dissipate. We don't know. But we know up until that point, it just kept on going higher and higher and higher. They were getting more and more slaves, right? Even when other people had stopped being into slavery in the level that they had. England had stopped being into slavery at that level. Spain had stopped being into slavery at that level. France had stopped being into slavery at that level. Didn't mean they weren't colonizing and calling it something different, right? But they still were not doing the same business. Yet America was breeding their own slaves and growing more and more people into slavery. Not calling them people, of course, because they weren't officially called people, right? Because they couldn't be taxed for those people. They wanted them to be property, right? So I want you to think about that now. So, and all the stuff that you have going on, right? 45%, that means that if I were to have 100 people in the room and I were to say, hey, raise your hands if you're a slave, 45 black people would get up. They would be 100% of all, representing all the black people in the room, because any black person in the South was considered to be a slave. Now, somebody's going to say, oh, what about this one person over here and that, whatever. If they belong to the Confederacy and Confederate states, you were going to be a slave owner, period. There was no passing that they gave you a thing for, whatever. And if you don't believe that, look into the history of New Orleans, where there were a bunch of people who considered themselves not to be black because they came from that French culture of having all these different things, you know, mulatto and ebony and all these different colors that they had of the brown rainbow, right? And they were trying to say that if you were this light-skinned or that, so they didn't believe themselves to be black. They tried to be in the Confederate Army and tried to build a Confederate Army and be under that or whatever. And all they were allowed to do was be slaves. The Confederacy said you cannot fight because you are not white. All right, so we're talking about within the Confederacy. Don't give me the stuff about the other stuff. Be contextual, right? So you said, I'm sorry, but slavery technically never ended because even though they got paid, but paid little. Well, slavery never ended because it never ended. The 13th Amendment said we just got to arrest you now. And the 14th Amendment says that you became part of a corporation, you got into debt. So anybody in debt is a slave, and anybody who's a slave is in debt. So if you have, if you're part of the American debt system, then you're a slave. So that in and of itself ends that. Even physical slavery, though, didn't, as far as like actual black people being enslaved and chattel slavery, didn't end until the 1960s and 1970s. We actually know that from accounts of the slaves themselves and videos and stuff of the slaves themselves. I'm not just talking about Reconstruction or Jim Crow or people just doing heinous acts. I'm talking about literal people who give accounts, who you can actually go on Netflix. I forget what the special is called. I haven't even watched it. I've just watched pieces of it, but I know this before the special because I've studied. Like, people were enslaved in certain places in the South still to the 60s and the 70s, just last century, okay? So these are things that are right there for us, right? But all you had to do to look at that, right? Once again, so the person said, oh, it's not about color. Well, why is it that the slaves that were there made up 45% of who was there, all 100% of that 45%? So all 45 people in that room who would have raised their hands, they were all black, right? Then after that, then you have to ask yourself a question, because this is the question that people don't like to get into, because now you got to talk about accountability, and people don't like to talk about accountability, whether it's for self or whether it's for their ancestry, because if your ancestors should be held accountable for something, man, it causes a lot of headache. Hey, how you doing, Chef? I'm sorry I didn't see you on there. Shalom, 100 yard. How you doing? So now I got to put this in the atmosphere. I got to put this question out there. You ready? How many people, percentage-wise, besides the 45%? So 45% is gone. We only got 55% left. How many people, percentage-wise, do you believe actually benefited from slavery? So 45% are slaves. Now, white people would have told you those 45%, they benefit from slavery. The people, white people of the Confederacy of that time. That's what they would have told you. That's what they wrote to this when they left and seceded the Union. That's what they wrote on paper, that the slaves were benefiting. So how many people do you think benefited from slavery? People say 0%. That's way too low. That's just us not being honest at all. Somebody said 20%. I'm sorry, you said your statement was, you said 55%? Pretty close, actually. Was there anything else that was as bad as history as sick as U.S. history? It said straw man. I don't understand what straw man. What point am I making this straw man? Are you talking about your straw man that allows you to be a 14th Amendment citizen? I'm not sure. You said we all know it existed. It was a bad time in history. Yeah, we do. So we should learn some lessons from it and make sure that we don't go through that again, which is the point. We have accountability for it, even as a society. Just be accountable for what happened with it, right? And not ignore it, not just say, oh, it happened, we don't need to bring it up again. Study it, see what happened in it, and make sure, because they're doing the same thing to people, whether they're black or white. That's my point. I don't think people get my point. When I talk about these things, I need you to comprehend they're doing it to you right now, whether you're white or black. If you white and you go to prison, they're going to do the same thing they do to you if you black and you go to prison. Now, some people in the prison might not understand that they shouldn't treat you bad because you're black, but they're going to do the same thing. It has nothing to do with you now? Okay. You don't understand the 13th or 14th Amendment then. That's on you. And it's your standard. You don't have to live by the standard I live by. I'm somebody that's not a 14th Amendment citizen. I don't have to worry about paying taxes and stuff because I don't worry about benefits and privileges that come from a system that's a corporation. You can literally look up 3002 15A, and it will tell you the United States is a corporation. You can look up, things to protect yourself when you make signatures, like UCC 1-308. Excuse me. Right? You can look up those things to be able to see what's there. You just choose that you want to stay in a place where you have to be in debt and be a slave. I choose not to be a slave or be in debt. But you have the right to say I'm wrong, this and that, or whatever. I'm on land and I don't pay mortgage. Never have, never will. No matter which land I'm on. Right? I'm talking about what I know. Now you can tell me that I'm wrong about it, that's fine, that's your right. But that's not my standard that I live by, right? So getting back to the answer to that, the percentage of people who benefited is 51%. Now, when we talk about benefit, people don't want to outright say, oh, that many people could have benefited because not all that many people own slaves. So here's the deal. I want you to think about it. Just think about it. You don't have to agree with it up first. I want you to think about it. I want you to think about it before I get somebody, oh, that's too high. Think about this. If I'm a car owner, okay, I have several vehicles or whatever, right? If I'm a car owner, right, but different people get to drive the vehicles. All right. So if I'm a car owner, I own the cars. I own the plantation. I own the cars. Okay. Hear me first. I want you to hear this. If I'm a car owner, if my wife drives any of the cars, even if she's not the car owner, right? If she drives any of the cars, right? Does she benefit from the car? Yes or no? Just real quick, right? That we don't have to overthink it. Because somebody gonna try and change this into a thing. Let's just make this clear, right? If I'm a car owner, but my wife drives the car, or my wife gets driven in the car, does she not get benefit from the car? Okay. If I have children and they get to ride in the car, do they not benefit from the car? You hear what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm saying? Right? So my children benefit from the car. Even if they can't drive yet, they benefit. But by that logic, no, because the slaves didn't get to drive in the car. The slaves worked on the car. The slaves put gas in the car. The slaves created things to make the car better, but the slaves did not get access to be in the car. And if they ever did try to get in the car and travel, right, then guess what they had to do? They had to be killed in front of the other slaves to remind the slaves that they could not drive the car. See, I know you'd like to take over the example, but what I'm talking about is who was allowed to be in the position of ownership or to benefit from the ownership. The slave did not benefit from the position of ownership. Tell me the slave that benefited from slavery. Slavery was not built to benefit the slave, right? Slavery was built to benefit the master. The master of the car is the one who gets to say who's in the car. And look back at the Willie Lynch experience, right? If you will. Willie Lynch said that if any time that somebody in your family tries to say that somebody should benefit from something that is a slave, it is your job and your responsibility to tell them why it is not. If I were to come home, if I was a white slave owner and I came home and my wife said, man, you know what, N-word, Tom out there is doing a great job. And my children started saying, yeah, N-word Tom is so much fun, and he does this and he does that. And he was playing with us, and he was playing the ukulele too, and he was doing this with the banjo, and he was just having a good old time. And then I heard that my job as a slave owner is to say, N-word Jim ain't S-H-I you know what. Don't ever bring up N-word Jim in this house again like that. Don't ever humanize him. Don't ever say that he should have any benefit or privilege in here from us. He doesn't get anything. He's just an N-word, and you will treat him like an N-word to the day he dies. That was my responsibility as a man. I was less than a man if I didn't treat him like a man. Now, we talked about last night, you got to be careful with this because Sister Toni Morrison has a quote that we use, that if you are somebody who has to put other people on their knees in order to be tall, you have a problem. So we had a problem in the system, but to act like that wasn't happening is foolish. And so by that logic that I'm talking about, before people try to twist it, that means that pretty much everybody was benefiting. If you worked for the slave owner, if you traded with the slave owner, if you went to a shop owned by the slave owner, if you lived in a town owned by the slave owner, if you made money made up by the slave owner, right? If you spent even before the Civil War and after the Civil War, let's go after even the Civil War, where you're using money with slave owners' pictures on it. Even Abraham Lincoln is a slave owner. Benjamin Franklin is a slave owner. You don't have any money that you even use without using slave owner. Andrew Jackson, the worst of slave owners. George Washington married his wife Martha because one of the reasons he said he married her is because she had as many slaves as he did. She doubled up what he had. She helped to make him richer. That's one of the benefits of his marriage was, she gonna get me more slaves. And then he died of syphilis because he was raping the slaves out of control. Because he was making the slaves sick by the way he treated them and made them live, and then got sick off of them. Come on. You said weren't most conquered Moors? Real history needs to be revealed. First of all, if you're talking about a Moor, not everybody that's black is a Moor, number one. Not every Moor is Asiatic, number one. Not every Moor is African. Not every Moor visited Europe. But if you're going to talk about that, yes, there are quite a few Moors that did make it into slavery. There are quite a few Moors that owned slaves, to be honest about it. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. We got to be contextual in facts. But yeah, I would agree with that. And go into this thing where it's like everybody's a Moor. Now, I do understand the Moorish-American relationship. I do understand those things, right? So I'm not anti everything you're saying, obviously. But for me, the main thing is the main thing. That being said, though, so think about what we're saying is that you are taught the same thing everybody's taught. And yet you see that we have this argument. We have a lot less people on than we normally do, right? So on this rising, probably just because of how we got cut off yesterday and how basically I was a little late, coming on with you guys, and therefore I wasn't really talking at the beginning. But we appreciate those who stayed to the end and those that are new. You said I didn't mean that. Someone has recently told me that they were already here. That's all you meant? Okay, well, no. Well, even with that, you do that. But once again, the first slaves were already natives. If you want to call them Moors too. You see what I'm saying? So we get into a weird place. Or what about the Olmec She? You got to go back in history way before there was any such thing as a Moor. Olmecs were already here. Africans were already coming over and being with the Olmecs, and even if you want to talk about having sex with the Olmecs. So how do we heal this trauma going forward? Do we heal it or leave it to church or to the Creator? The Creator wants you to be healed and whole in everything that you do. One of the things that you do to heal is that you have to identify what's causing the symptoms. So we have symptoms of lasciviousness, we have symptoms of lust, we have symptoms of poverty, we have symptoms of self-hatred, we have symptoms of depression. And if we don't, right, but those are symptoms. A lot of times when you go to the store, you buy your Tylenol, you get your medicine from the store, your doctor prescribes something. They don't deal with what the actual ailment is. They try to get something to cover your symptoms, right? So first and foremost, we should deal with what's causing the sickness. Is the sickness PTSS, as Dr. Joy DeGroy wrote about? Is that something that we need to deal with, where we still carry certain characteristics that come from people who colonized us and told us that we weren't who we were, told us that we had nothing valuable in history, told us that as they stole things from us, we also were people who never had anything worth stealing from, right? So if we go to that first and foremost and try to deal with, man, what happened and what are we still doing? Why do we still say, I'm gonna whip you? Who introduced that? We didn't whip our children. We spanked our children, sure. We disciplined our children, sure. We didn't whip them until somebody else told them. Why do we still carry that, and why do we still find it acceptable? And when do we get together as a community and hold people accountable? If I hear you say you're going to whip your child, hey, bro, hey, sis, that's a child. That's not a slave. You don't have to whip them, right? Certain things like that. Those are things that we talk about, right? Learning that we've been mistaught, so that we can actually have proper context. Learning that Christopher Columbus was nowhere close to being the first person to come over here, and that he was terrible in every way. He was out here, people talked about the fact that he was trying to have sex with llamas, right? Like that he was having sex with little baby girls. They were raping girls so uncontrollably that the girls couldn't even have babies after a while, which is part of the reason why he pretty much killed off all the Taino people that were there on that island, right? He was literally having babies hit in the head with hammers because they didn't want to use bullets, because bullets cost too much money to use on a baby's head. Find out things that free us from this. Find out before these people came, who were we? Who were our kings? What was the name of our Elohim? What did our people mean before somebody twisted it? What did Baal actually mean? Before somebody twisted it, what did Shangdi actually mean? Before somebody told you Onyon Capone had to be this, who was before Onyon Capone? Who was before Anansi? When they say Gianyami, or some of you would say Gianyami, what does Gianyami mean? It means there's none except. And what does that mean? They didn't even use the term God because we don't use the term God, right? God is a white deity, a Germanic deity. So when they said Gianyami, who are they talking about? There's none except. There's none except the only one that has ever really truly existed since before the foundation of the world, that we are simply a part of and coming out of, and the child of that person thereof, right? That's how you heal. You go to a place to where you do focus on the symptoms, but now you got to focus on the healing. I agree. So, when somebody hits us with that, that's something that means a lot. How do we heal? Because usually what people say is nobody ever tells us how to heal. But the fact of the matter is, I got to identify what's causing your symptom. I got to identify the dis-ease. Excuse me. I got to identify the dis-ease. The thing that causes you to not be at ease. Who taught you to not be at ease with your hair? Why did they say that? Why is it that if you're not shaped up, you're not considered to be good? Why is it that if you don't make sure that your hair is still presentable the way that white people say your hair should be, even if you get it long, that it's not good enough? Why is it that what somebody else says is clean and great is not? While at the same time telling you, that they want somebody tall, dark, and handsome, but then they don't want you, supposedly. But then they have sex with you behind the scenes. In France and other places, they call it negrophilia, where literally they had a philia. They had this lust for Negroes. They would have sex with us and stuff at the clubs and things like that, but they didn't want to do it in public. And if they got caught in public, then all of a sudden they were bad people. They wanted you. They wanted to be like you, maybe even carry your children, but just didn't want to be on the same level as you. Right, you got that good hair. And by the way, black people carry all types of hair. Right? I mean, Elohim is before everything. If you know about Elohim, you know Allah and Elohim are basically coming from the same word. I'm not here to cause division. The main thing is the main thing. I'm here to give context to facts. You said, why creates a new sickness almost? A new sickness? No, these aren't new sicknesses. First of all, if you want to talk about new sicknesses, who created the new sickness? If something's patented, then that means a man created it, because by law, man cannot patent something that was created by man. So, number one. Number two, and we're going to talk about this stuff though and be real about it, be honest about it as well. Um, we're not talking about new stuff. You'd be surprised stuff that you think is new, like polio. People thought it was a new thing. There are people who had polio that they find in coffins that we know to be that became before the year zero, right? So a lot of this stuff is not new. But what isn't new as well is if you don't eat correctly, right? And if you have all the stuff out here that's designed to make us unhealthy, you will find yourself sick. Now the question is, what are you going to do to make sure that you can get out of said sickness and dis-ease? You know, but once again, we have to get to a place where what is real, like what is the real thing. The problem is that we're trying to identify sickness off of a lack of false diseases. The lost cause is a false disease. Manifest destiny is a false disease, right? The theory of evolution, the whole book is literally called Origin of Species, the Theory of Evolution, the Struggle for Survival of Favored Races. The book that was written by Darwin, causing the system of Darwinism, was literally written to say that white people are on top and black people on the bottom, and white people need to survive because we came from better animals than black people did. People can say whatever, right? But that's what the book was written about. It's in the title. But people don't know the title. They've never even read the book, but they have all these discussions with you about the book. You got to get to a place to where it's a part of your culture. Even what is your culture? What do you identify as your culture? Tassels or no, right? Skirts or no? What's your culture? Are you willing to stand up for your culture? Are you willing to live your culture? Are you willing to speak your culture? That's why we teach Hebrew characters. Are you willing to even speak your culture? Are you willing to live your culture? Are you willing to establish a culture? Heck, what is the culture between a husband and a wife in your people? Not what somebody else tells you a good husband and wife is. Do you have anything that establishes your culture? So then if you read somebody else's stuff on a husband and wife, you can compare it to your own culture and say, yeah, we agree with that, or no, we don't. Or is everything have to come from somebody else? And here's one of the wildest things, and we'll leave this alone. Maybe we'll talk about this later. This evening is my boring day today, so I'm going to not be on. And it's Wednesday anyways. I wouldn't be on anyways. Maybe we'll bring this back on the Rising. Maybe we'll bring this back in the Rising tomorrow. And by the way, those of you who asked about it, yes, you can reach out to us about the, your questions regarding our, the Yaz Land Project 83, getting together to make sure that we get into history, right? Or get into buying our own land, excuse me. So if you'd like to join us on that process of families getting together and pledging $83.34 a month to help us to get to $1,000 per family, so that come October 1st, we'll be able to go out and buy our own land. That's still available. You can text me at the number that's written above. You can go to the website to find out other ways you can reach us. You can look to go to hashtag Find Kofi. That's hashtag FINDKOFI. That's the YouTube channel. Those of you who are on the YouTube channel right now listening, you can just go ahead and put say that you're interested in the comment section. I'll get back to you. But basically, we're also having classes starting next Monday, every day at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern in New York time. It's going to be on Zoom. And we're asking for $90 donation per class for 2 months straight of class, and then you'll get your, certification, and you'll get of completion, and you'll get your credits and all that stuff as well through SOC University. Mondays for this semester, what we're doing as far as through the Kofi 40 branch, if you will, Mondays is going to be on marriage, Tuesdays will be on monarchy, Wednesdays will be on sovereignty, Thursdays will be on natural medicine 1, Fridays will be on fibroid cysts, Saturdays are going to be on Hebrew characters. And you can reach us at that information. And but I want you to, what was I saying we were going to come back to? Wow. We were going to come back to something on the Rising tomorrow. It escapes me. Maybe it wasn't for us. Maybe it's not for this. Once again, that starts on Monday, October 11th. So on October 11th, that'll be the first class. And so, but to just get in contact with us, text us, reach out to us, and we'll get you more information ASAP. Also, too, don't forget that October 18th, rather, that'll be every Monday morning at 6:45 a.m. Eastern in New York time. I'll be on at 6:30 a.m. if you want to fellowship, but we'll start with 6:45 a.m. to 7:45 a.m. Eastern in New York time. Early rising session, specifically just dealing with the Bible only for those who want to join us on that journey. And then October 30th, that'll be our Brothers in Black. That'll be on Zoom as well. Sisters, you're invited as well. You can invite whoever you like. Brothers or sisters, invite whoever you like. Brothers, we're asking that you wear black in solidarity. October 31st, we're going to have discussion at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern in New York time. And that'll be with my wife and my child on as we continue to talk about Halloween on that day, and we can do something, come together while everybody else is out in the streets. We can come together, we can have our babies on. That's what we're going to do a little earlier. Usually we do it at 8 p.m., but we're going to do it at 7 p.m. and allow our children to talk through some things, maybe see why things are so hard or difficult sometimes or frustrating in some of the things it is that we deal with when we see our friends and family and everybody celebrating something that we feel like is evil and is taken away from things. So you can join us for that. And then in November, we're going to make sure that we start working towards two things. Those who are married, if you want to start working on your marriage contracts between one another, this is how we'll treat each other. This is what we'll do during arguments. This is what our belief system is, et cetera, et cetera. This is what we, have established, and this is what we're going to sign off on. And then also, two, we're going to start working on people who want to be baptized in the name of Yahweh, in the name of Yashva, in the name of Ruach HaKodesh, and doing that in different places in the country if you're interested in that. And lastly, then in December, my wife will be back on with our Women in Red, which we do once a year. And for that, brothers are invited to. Women, men, you can invite whoever you want to. Ladies, we're asking that you dress in red for solidarity for that. And that will be at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern in New York time. And that's going to be that'll be at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern in New York time. And I think that's December 16th. It's either December 16th or December 18th, whatever that Saturday is right there. So we appreciate it. We thank you. We'll be back on tomorrow on The Rising. And I can't remember exactly where we were supposed to be, so I don't think it was for us. So we'll see what the Most High has in tune for us, in store for us on The Rising tomorrow. Thank you all. Thank you for your prayers. Continuing to heal, getting better. Still haven't been able to figure out exactly what caused this or whatever, so we're kind of stuck. But the symptoms, we're dealing with, unfortunately. But once again, it kind of gives the credence to what I was saying earlier. You don't just want to heal symptoms. You want to deal with what the issue is. So we're praying that we find the exact issue so we can put this behind. I know it's not COVID, actually went out and made sure just to be safe that it wasn't not, because it's something that seems to be tough, but it's just a infection. Could actually tell by the color of mucus and all that stuff without going deep into all that. But long story short, we can kind of tell it's probably something dealing with infection. We just don't know where the infection came from and what it was, whether it was something that was ate or I know my children had something as far as sickness and stuff. But anyways, continue to pray for us. Thank you so much for the happy born day wishes. I appreciate the King and Queen in each and every one of you. And we're going to go ahead and enjoy our day. I'm thankful and grateful for being in front of you. We're grateful that the Most High made sure He protected the live and everything. And we're back and ready to go on TikTok. So that everybody who was on with us today, whether you be on TikTok, whether you be with us on the podcast, whether you be with us on Facebook, whether you be with us on YouTube, we appreciate you. We're thankful to you. Please make sure you support my wife, once again, the Honorable Bloom and Flourish. Not A-N-D, but the letter N, Bloom and Flourish. We look forward to being in front of you all again. And we'll be back in front of you at 8 a.m. Eastern, New York time or Eastern time. And as always, this has been Pastor Kofi, a.k.a. the Shadow Band One, Pastor Servant of Christ, where we're always changing lives one mind at a time by being a voice of the voiceless and speaking the unspoken. Remember, this is our year of pursuit, where we are pursuing the promises of the Most High. We want you to hashtag finish strong in that pursuit. And as you're doing so, until I have the chance of being in front of you again, please remember, as always, that you are loved, you are necessary, you are majestic, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and you, which is all of us working together, will be the reason this world changes for the better, bare minimum. Will be the reason why people who are in this system no longer have to be of it. Shalom, fam, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace.